After yet another wet race, the drivers have reacted on everything that happened. From trucks driving on the circuit to full wet tyres that don't seem fit for the wet. Watch the entire video to find out what the drivers had to say about all the mistakes made in the last two races. But before we dive in, we have a question. Do you think races should be driven in wet conditions? Or should the FIA be lenient in their starting times, like Daniel Ricciardo recently suggested? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Max Verstappen, the reigning Formula 1 world champion, and Charles Leclerc have both encouraged Pirelli, the manufacturer of racing tyres, to enhance its extreme wet rubber. Teams used the green wall intermediate tyre during the Japanese Grand Prix, despite standing water and spray at Suzuka, because they were afraid to use the blue extreme wet tyre, which has problems warming up and is deemed unfit for usage. The drivers didn't put on the extreme tyres until the FIA mandated their usage. However, they were swiftly removed when the race resumed following the 2-hour stoppage. With the Singapore Grand Prix also held in similar conditions, when teams avoided wet tyres at all costs and the start time was pushed back an hour, two-time world champion Verstappen and Leclerc both urged Pirelli to improve its product. Verstappen seems to think that the wet tyre right now isn't fitted for its needs and should be improved at all costs. I don't want to dig out of anyone, but I think we need better rain tyres, Verstappen explained to the media. If you saw what we could do in the 1990s or early 2000s with the amount of water on the track, there is a big difference to today. I'm very happy to have a few test days and try all kinds of tyres, but we need better rain tyres. The extremes are just too slow, and they can't really carry a lot of water away. That's why everyone always tries to switch very quickly to the intermediate, because it's just so much faster over a lap. You could see from one lap to the next, we went from the extreme to the inter today, and we went to nearly 5 seconds faster, and that is just too big. That's why nobody really wants to run the extreme, and when it rains like it did when the red flag came out, you would have put extreme tyres on. I think it would still be really difficult to drive. But then, if you compare that to 20 years ago, that would have been perfectly fine. So there must be criticism, because I'm very happy to help out and I really should look into it. Maybe we can just organise more tests in the wet and work together with Pirelli to try and find better tyres, to at least have an opportunity to really drive in the wet, and not always only drive like 2 laps on an extreme, switch to the intermediate and call it a wet race, because a wet race is also normally driven with heavy rain. Verstappen seems to have a point here. Back in the days, the races were driven rain or no rain, and right now it seems that racing in the wet is only possible with a drizzle. But the tyres aren't the only problem that the drivers are facing now when driving in the rain, because the new 2022 cars also release an insane amount of spray, causing the drivers further back to see barely anything whilst driving their car at 300 km an hour or more speeds. This is something that should be addressed as well, as therefore Leclerc talked on the visibility, or lack thereof, from the cars in 2022 during a downpour through spray that was kicked up. I think a big problem of these cars is just the visibility, the Monegasque explained. So whatever we can do to try and improve the visibility and minimize the spray, especially behind the cars, this will be hugely beneficial, because I believe that sometimes we can actually run for the conditions of the track. But just because of the visibility, because it's so dangerous being behind and you don't see anything, that we end up running at all. We should try and find a solution to try and minimize the spray. For now, it seems like it will take a while until we will see a race being done in full rain conditions. Hopefully, Pirelli will be able to develop usable extreme wets in the near future, so the drivers can do their racing and the fans can watch the show. So let's talk about some of the mistakes the FIA made in the last 2 races. First up, the tractor incident. Martin Brundle finds it incomprehensible that a recovery vehicle entered the Suzuka circuit when racers were still operating their cars on the slick surface. The former F1 driver complains to Sky Sports about the situation. Following Carlos Sainz's collision, a rescue car hurried onto the track, posing a threat to everyone. Despite the safety car situation, F1 cars were still dispersed and travelling at various speeds throughout the course. Additionally, the rain made it challenging for vehicles to see. Gasly experienced one of the most terrifying moments of his life when he witnessed the car drive by him, and Brundle understands just why. I was horrified because I had an incident there in 1994. I had been crying for the race to be red flagged because the conditions were horrific. I aquaplaned off in a place that I couldn't see where I was going. Couldn't see my own dashboard. I just missed one of those cat diggers, but I hit a marshal. I ran back to help him and the bone of his leg was sticking out of his overalls. It was a horrible mess. I also said in 1998 in commentary, we can't have vehicles on track when race cars are on track in wet conditions. You can aquaplane or have a car issue. It should never matter, said Brundle. Given that Jules Bianchi passed away from a similar situation in 2014, one might assume that Formula 1 has learnt from its mistakes. As he veered off the track in the rain and collided with a crane that was attempting to salvage another car. It should have been an instant red flag in my opinion, because of the conditions. Everyone was out on inters. The race director can command everyone must be on full wets. I think he should say we will start on extreme wet tyres, so teams are not driven down by the competitive results and hoping to get away with it. Those conditions weren't right for inters. Extreme wets would have probably been okay. Lessons hadn't been learnt. That had to be a red flag with a car in a critical position at high speed in those conditions. No alternative. Not even a question of collecting the cars in the safety car snake, Brundle concluded. Brundle is certainly not the only one to have voiced their displeasure with the FIA's actions. After the race, Pierre Gasly was furious. Lando Norris and Sergio Perez stood behind their colleague, and several team bosses were also angry that the FIA had permitted this to occur. To avoid this from happening again, the FIA has already opened an investigation. And that wasn't the only mistake the FIA made during the race. As the FIA committed error after error during the Japanese Grand Prix and in the coming weeks, further criticism is to be expected. Further mistakes were not racing in the rain. Although we eventually finished half of the race distance and full points were still awarded, the race organisers' choice to delay the race for so long is questionable. Much earlier, drivers and teams recommended running the track dry while using the full wets. 3/4 of an hour remained for the race because this was not done. The track was already so dry at that point that the drivers wanted to quickly switch from full wet tyres to intermediates. What use do you make of full wets then? It's always argued that the spray from the tyres makes it difficult to see, but you've been aware of this issue for a while. Therefore, why not develop a tyre that has less of that, or accept that there is less visibility, requiring drivers to drive more quietly and resulting in rain races like before? Poor flag control. The flagging off came next. Since the race was completed on schedule, the winner will begin driving one more lap when the timer reaches 0, just like in Singapore. Verstappen, however, crossed the line with 2 seconds left on the clock and was immediately flagged off. Therefore, the Dutchman kept going full tilt and set a green time in the first sector. That, however, turned out to be no longer required. And finally, the point scoring. F1 and the FIA set up a good schedule so that it was clear to everyone at what percentage of the race how many points would be handed out, because the 2021 Belgian Grand Prix ended in a debacle after points were awarded for a race that was never run. So it seemed odd that a calculation with all the points was visible during the race. When the punishment for Leclerc was known, it suddenly appeared on the screen that Verstappen was the world champion, which led you to believe that the statistics had not yet been updated. Nobody was aware. Verstappen would receive 19 points, Perez 14 and Leclerc 12, according to the regulations in place since Belgium, leaving Verstappen 1 point short of winning the World Championship. There seems to be a catch though. It is quite evident from the FIA's announcement that this points allocation only takes effect if a race is abandoned. In Japan, it wasn't the case. Full points could just be awarded because the race was resumed and completed under race circumstances, despite not being finished. The fact that this was once more so unclear for everyone speaks much about the FIA's communication and the rulebook. These are quite hazy and confusing. And so, the FIA have set themselves in the spotlights once again. Will they ever learn from their mistakes? Who knows? What do you think the FIA should do to finally get their act together? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next video.